In this video I'm looking at the prelude to the third act of Parsifal, the last music drama by Richard Wagner and one of my favourite pieces of music. I won't go into too much depth of analysis, but I do want to note a few things that may help us to appreciate the craftsmanship that went into composing this work. We begin with very much a B-flat minor feeling, the upbeat on the B-flat suggesting the tonic note. This opening motif is well constructed out of these strong intervals, the ascending fourth, which then descends by a diminished fifth. It's balanced by that falling fifth in the bass, which really sets the tone for the rest of the piece, with that plaintive, sighing motion. Already, in bar 2, Wagner introduces an melodic ambiguity with the intrusion of that G-flat. Is it an added sixth, or does it establish the fundamental of a G-flat seventh chord? We are treated with more vagrant harmonies or chromatic shifts as the phrase progresses. The diminished seventh chord, favourite device of late Romantic composers, offers some smooth part leading in this passage, and it also provides a kind of profile of the motivic content of much of this prelude. The diminished seventh maps out neatly onto the octatonic scale, from which we can derive a lot of melodic ideas in this passage. At 2:14, for instance, the melody and bass line map out this octatonic scale with added chromatic notes to smooth out the voice leading and to offer a more defined sense of tonality. Now, I should say that I'm not suggesting Wagner consciously thought of writing music in the octatonic scale. Here it's merely a consequence of his use of extreme chromaticism and diminished chords. But for the sake of this analysis, it's a recognizable structure we can point to. In this section he cranks up the tension by repeating these phrases up the scale by a semitone. We can feel the anxiety ramping up a notch until it reaches a peak, and we experience a sense of relief as the melodic line descends, almost with a sense of deflation, which leads us into a repeat of the main motif, now transposed up an augmented fourth. The importance of leitmotif in Wagner really comes to the fore in these busy passages, for they root the music in something solid and familiar, which allows for a freer play of tonality with more expressive and ambiguous harmony, without compromising the formal structure of the work. Wagner succeeds in this because his motifs on the whole have strong tonal implications. It's a question of balance between these different elements of the composition. The regular, plodding bass line in this passage also does a lot of work towards establishing a sense of rootedness, almost like a passacaglia. In places it closely resembles the kind of walking bass figures you get in certain blues progressions, though I doubt Wagner would approve of the analogy. In fact, the telltale profile of this phrase is what makes up the character Kundry's leitmotif. The way it folds back on itself helps to suggest the cyclical nature of time, for this is a character who has lived for hundreds of years in a seemingly futile search for redemption. As a motif, it's rooted not by tonality per se, as by its own repetition. This is a crucial distinction to make, for Wagner is utilizing here the sense of telos that comes with tonality, the feeling that we are approaching a goal, a final resolution of dissonance, such as we find in the climactic ending of Tristan und Isolde. In Parsifal, this sense of telos is absent from the music of the more wayward characters, Kundry, Amfortas, and the evil magician Klingsor. They are stuck in a cycle of suffering, unable to effect their own deliverance from it. We may find in this the strongest example of a Buddhist influence on the opera, which Wagner openly acknowledged. In this sense, the characters are stuck in samsara, the directionless cycle of death and rebirth, and only the intervention of Parsifal can offer them liberation. One of Parsifal's leitmotifs is an ascending series of fifths, which finds its fullest expression in the final scene of the opera, when Parsifal releases Amfortas from service to the Grail. A fifth is a very pure consonant harmony, suggesting the moral purity of Parsifal himself, and these fifths seem to be building towards a resolution, ascending by degrees of the diatonic scale. In the Prelude, they appear with these dotted rhythms, which links them to another motif associated with Parsifal, this martial-sounding figure. This is his most characteristic leitmotif, and it is unapologetically tonal, tracing out a brilliant triadic fanfare. It's one figure conspicuously absent from this prelude, which is establishing a more sombre tone for the third act. At this stage, Parsifal is a mature warrior, and it makes sense that his music is more sober and subdued. Much of this prelude reads almost as a dialogue or conflict between this motif of the mature Parsifal and the regular, keening figure associated with Kundry. I want to draw attention to the dissonance here, because of how extreme it is for its time. Although Wagner is well known for his use of dissonance, it remains striking to this day, a testament of how expressive his music can be. It owes this extreme sense of dissonance in part to Wagner's use of registers. Having the G-flat sound high above in a gaping melodic leap gives full emphasis to its dissonant semitonal relationship to the F in the bass. One other possible reason it sounds so striking is that this is a note outside the octatonic scale to which the bass line roughly corresponds. If we're thinking in that sort of mode or scale, we might expect to hear a G natural in the melody, but instead that scale degree is flattened, leaving the note sticking out like a sore thumb. I've composed a very conventional alternative to this dissonance, just to illustrate the point I'm making. Here's how it would sound if the melody remained in the same register, and if we stuck conventionally within the octatonic scale. It's a perfectly fine passage of music which might have come out of any average late Romantic composer, but it lacks the emotional oomph of the Wagner, and is in no way remarkable as the original is. Wagner already explored the impact of these kinds of displaced melodies in his earlier music drama, Die Meistersinger von Nuremberg, particularly in this passage to which Arnold Schoenberg draws our attention. These kinds of innovations and such a flagrant disregard for the rules of smooth melodic writing aroused the anger of critic Edward Hanslick, for whom the conservatism and formal purity of Brahms set the bar for other composers. In Hanslick's view, this kind of writing was simply amateurish, or else in very poor taste. Personally, I'm not entirely convinced by Wagner's use of this style of melodic writing in the example from Die Meistersinger, and I can understand Edward Hanslick's reservations. But in the case of the passage from Parsifal, such innovative composing elevates the material to new heights of grandeur and pathos.